Riley Chun stepped off the transport bus into the dust and heat of Fort Braxton, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The training facility sprawled before her like a concrete maze, all sharp angles and unforgiving surfaces. Other recruits clustered in nervous groups, their voices carrying the edge of anticipation mixed with fear. Sergeant Morrison spotted her immediately. He stood near the equipment shed, arms crossed, his weathered face scanning the new arrivals like a predator selecting prey. Riley looked exactly like what he expected from the female recruits. Small frame, maybe 5'4", couldn't weigh more than 120 soaking wet. Perfect. Morrison nudged Corporal Hayes. Look at that one. He pointed toward Riley with his chin. $20 says she washes out before week 2. Hayes grinned, following Morrison's gaze. I'll take that bet, but only because I think she'll quit day 3. Look at those hands. Never held anything heavier than a textbook. Staff Sergeant Brooks joined them, squinting in Riley's direction. Which one we talking about? When Morrison pointed again, Brooks laughed. Oh, come on. That's not even fair. She probably signed up thinking this was summer camp. Give her one day in the mud, and she'll be crying for mommy. Riley approached the equipment station, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She kept her expression neutral, but her eyes tracked everything. The layout of the facility. Exit points. The 3 instructors obviously discussing her. Their body language screamed trouble. Morrison stepped forward as she reached the counter. Well, what do we have here? His voice carried the particular tone drill instructors reserved for recruits they'd already written off. Let me guess, sweetheart. You watched some movies, thought this looked exciting. Riley met his gaze directly. No, Sergeant. I'm here to train. The simple response seemed to irritate Morrison more than defiance would have. Hayes moved closer, positioning himself slightly behind Riley. Classic intimidation formation. 2 instructors flanking, 1 in front. Basic crowd control. Train for what exactly? Morrison's smile had no warmth in it. Because this isn't yoga class. This is where we separate the real soldiers from the wannabes. Have you ever walked into a situation where people immediately sized you up and decided you didn't belong? Drop your state or country in the comments, because this happens everywhere. Brooks circled around to complete the triangle formation. I've seen your type before. Daddy probably paid for some fancy self-defense classes. Now you think you're ready for real combat training. Riley remained perfectly still. Her breathing stayed even, hands relaxed at her sides. The instructors read this as submission. They had no idea she was calculating distances, reaction times, weak points in their positioning. Here's how this works. Morrison continued, his voice dropping to what he thought was a menacing whisper. You can save us all some time and pack up right now. Call it homesickness, call it whatever you want. But you will not make it through this program. Other recruits had stopped their conversations, sensing the confrontation. They formed a loose circle, some looking sympathetic, others relieved the attention wasn't on them. Riley noticed 2 female recruits near the back, their faces tight with worry. Hey, step closer. Sergeant Morrison is trying to help you here. Trust me, what's coming next is going to make today look like a picnic. Riley's voice remained calm. I appreciate the concern, but I'll stay. The 3 instructors exchanged glances. Morrison's jaw tightened. In his experience, recruits either broke immediately under pressure or got mouthy and defiant. Riley's quiet confidence didn't fit either category, and that bothered him. Your funeral, Brooks muttered. Just remember, when you're face down in the mud tomorrow, crying because your perfect little world got shattered, we try to warn you. Morrison leaned forward, close enough that Riley could smell the coffee on his breath. One more thing, recruit. Around here, we don't coddle the weak. You want equality? You'll get exactly what the men get. No special treatment, no participation trophies, no safe spaces. Riley nodded once. Understood, Sergeant. As the instructors walked away, their voices carried back clearly. They wanted her to hear. Give her 12 hours, Morrison said. She'll be begging to go home. I'm not even sure she'll make it through equipment issue, Hayes replied. Did you see those soft little hands? Brooks laughed. My money's on her crying during the first PT session. They always do. Riley shouldered her duffel bag and walked toward the barracks, her expression unchanged. Behind her, the other recruits began to whisper among themselves. Some felt sorry for her. Others figured the instructors were probably right. None of them noticed that Riley's soft little hands bore faint scars across the knuckles, or that her supposedly weak frame moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much damage the human body could absorb and deliver. The barracks buzzed with nervous energy as recruits claimed bunks and unpacked gear. Riley selected a corner spot, methodically arranging her belongings with military precision. The other recruits watched her movements, some curious, others already keeping their distance after witnessing the confrontation outside. Sarah Martinez, one of the female recruits from earlier, approached hesitantly. "Hey, I'm Sarah. That was pretty intense out there with the instructors." Riley looked up from organizing her footlocker. "Riley, and yeah, they seem to have strong opinions." "Strong opinions is putting it mildly." Sarah glanced around nervously. "Look, I've heard stories about this place. The instructors here, especially Morrison, they have a reputation for breaking people they don't think belong." Before Riley could respond, the barracks door slammed open. Morrison strode in, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The casual conversations died immediately. "Listen up, recruits." His voice filled the space effortlessly. "Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, you will be outside in full gear for your first real taste of what this program offers. Tonight, you get to think about whether you really want to be here." His eyes found Riley in her corner bunk. "Some of you are already having second thoughts, I'm sure. That's smart. Better to realize you're not cut out for this now than waste everyone's time finding out later." Riley continued folding her clothing, her movements steady and deliberate. Morrison's pointed stare didn't seem to affect her at all. Corporal Hayes appeared in the doorway behind Morrison. "Sergeant, should we go over the equipment requirements?" "Good idea, Hayes." Morrison pulled out a clipboard. "Full combat gear means full combat gear. 40-pound pack, weapon, ammunition, water, rations. If you can't carry it, you can't be here." He walked slowly between the bunks, his presence making several recruits visibly uncomfortable. When he reached Riley's area, he stopped. "Chun, right?" He consulted his clipboard with exaggerated care. "Says here you weigh 118 pounds. That pack is going to be more than a third of your body weight." Riley folded her last shirt and placed it in the footlocker. "I'll manage, Sergeant." "Will you now?" Morrison's tone carried mock surprise. "Because last week we had a recruit, big guy, former college football player, and that pack put him flat on his face after 2 miles. Other recruits were listening intently now. Sarah shot Riley a worried glance. A few of the male recruits seemed to be enjoying the show. "Of course," Morrison continued. "If you're having doubts, now would be the time to speak up. Save yourself some embarrassment tomorrow." Riley stood and faced him directly. "No doubts, Sergeant." The simple confidence in her voice seemed to irritate Morrison more than arguments would have. He expected pleading or defiance, not this calm certainty. Staff Sergeant Brooks entered the barracks, surveying the scene. "Everything under control here, Sergeant Morrison? Just making sure our recruits understand what they're signing up for." Morrison gestured toward Riley. "Some of them might need a reality check before tomorrow morning." Brooks approached Riley's bunk, looking her up and down with obvious skepticism. "You know, recruit, there's no shame in recognizing your limitations. Physical standards exist for a reason. I understand the standards, Staff Sergeant." "Do you?" Brooks picked up one of Riley's combat boots, examining it. "Because these boots alone probably weigh more than you're used to carrying. Add the gear, the heat, the pace we maintain, and even experienced soldiers struggle." Hayes joined the group gathering around Riley's corner. The 3 instructors formed a loose semicircle, their body language deliberately intimidating. Other recruits pretended to busy themselves with unpacking while straining to listen. "Tell you what," Morrison said, his voice taking on a falsely helpful tone. "Why don't you try on the full gear tonight? Get a feel for what you're committing to." "Hayes, grab a standard pack from supply." Riley nodded. "If that would be helpful." The instructors exchanged glances. They had expected resistance, not compliance. Morrison's plan was to load her down with gear until she collapsed under the weight, proving his point to everyone watching. Hayes returned with a fully loaded combat pack, setting it down with a deliberate thud that emphasized its weight. Here we go. 40 pounds of reality. Riley approached the pack without hesitation. She lifted it with smooth, controlled movement, settling it onto her shoulders and adjusting the straps with practiced efficiency. The watching recruits held their breath. Morrison waited for her to stumble or complain about the weight. Instead, Riley stood perfectly balanced, the pack seeming to have no effect on her posture or breathing. "How does that feel?" Brooks asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to admit defeat. "Fine, Staff Sergeant." The three instructors looked increasingly frustrated. Morrison stepped closer. "Fine. 40 pounds of gear feels fine." "Yes, Sergeant." Hayes gestured toward the door. "Walk to the end of the building and back. Let's see how fine it feels after some movement." Riley nodded and walked toward the exit, her gait steady and controlled. The pack might as well have been empty based on how she carried it. She completed the requested walk without any sign of strain. When she returned, the barracks had gone completely silent. Even the instructors seemed momentarily at a loss. Morrison recovered first. "Well, that's tonight. Tomorrow we'll see how fine you feel after 5 miles in full sun." Riley removed the pack and set it down gently. "Looking forward to it, Sergeant." The three instructors left without another word, but their body language radiated frustration. They had planned to break her confidence before training even began, and instead she had calmly met every challenge. As soon as they were gone, conversations erupted throughout the barracks. Sarah hurried over to Riley's bunk. "How did you do that? The pack looked like it didn't even affect you." Riley resumed organizing her gear. "Just practice, I guess." "Practice with what?" "Military training. Something like that." Around them, other recruits were reassessing their first impressions. The small, quiet woman in the corner bunk was clearly more than she appeared. Some began to wonder what else they had gotten wrong about her. Dawn broke gray and humid over Fort Braxton as recruits stumbled from their bunks at the harsh sound of reveille. Riley was already awake, dressed, and ready when the wake-up call came. Her bunk was made to military specifications, gear arranged precisely. The first physical training session began at 05:30. Morrison led the formation, his voice cutting through the morning air as recruits struggled to keep pace on their initial run. Riley maintained position in the middle of the group, her breathing steady while others gasped for air. After 3 miles, 2 recruits had fallen back, walking and clutching their sides. Morrison called a halt near the obstacle course. Well, looks like some of you overestimated your abilities." His eyes swept the group, lingering on Riley, who showed no signs of fatigue. "Chun, you seem comfortable. Step forward." Riley moved to the front of the formation. Morrison gestured toward the obstacle course, a brutal series of walls, rope climbs, and crawling sections designed to test limits. "Since you're feeling so good, why don't you demonstrate the first obstacle for everyone else?" The wall stood 12 feet high, requiring upper body strength most recruits took weeks to develop. Morrison expected her to fail spectacularly in front of the entire group. Riley approached the wall, studied it briefly, then executed a perfect climb. Her movements were efficient, controlled, no wasted motion. She dropped down on the other side and jogged back to formation. The watching recruits exchanged glances. Hayes stepped closer to Morrison. "Lucky break," Hayes muttered. "Probably did rock climbing or something." Training continued through the week with increasing intensity. Each day brought new challenges, and each day Riley met them without complaint or struggle. The instructors found themselves forced to escalate their efforts. During weapons training, Morrison assigned Riley an older, poorly maintained rifle while others received newer equipment. She cleaned and adjusted it until it performed flawlessly. When the scoring targets came back, her groupings were tighter than recruits who had been training for months. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Brooks demanded, examining her target. "Practice, Staff Sergeant." "What kind of practice?" "Range time. The vague answers frustrated the instructors more than outright defiance would have. They were accustomed to breaking down recruits' confidence, exposing weaknesses, establishing dominance. Riley offered no openings. By week 2, other recruits had begun noticing the pattern. The instructors assigned Riley extra duties, heavier equipment, more difficult tasks. She completed everything without complaint or visible effort. Sarah cornered her after evening chow. "They're really going after you, more than anyone else." Riley cleaned her rifle methodically. "I've noticed. Doesn't it bother you? The way they single you out?" "Not particularly. How are you staying so calm?" "Morrison made Jackson cry yesterday just for dropping his pack wrong." Riley looked up from her weapon maintenance. Getting emotional doesn't solve problems. During hand-to-hand combat training, Morrison paired Riley with progressively larger opponents, hoping to see her overwhelmed. Instead, she demonstrated technique that impressed even the instructors, though they try to hide it. "Where exactly did you train before coming here?" Hayes asked after watching her smoothly counter a takedown attempt from a recruit who outweighed her by 60 pounds. "Various places. Military. Some military influence." The non-answers were becoming a source of irritation for all 3 instructors. They sensed something deeper about Riley's background, but couldn't pinpoint what. 3 weeks into training, Morrison called her aside after evening formation. "Chun, you've been here almost a month. Most recruits show some weakness by now, some area where they struggle. You seem to excel at everything." Riley maintained parade rest position. "I'm here to train, Sergeant. That's what bothers me. You're not here to train. You're here for some other reason." Morrison circled her slowly. "Real recruits have learning curves. They make mistakes, show improvement over time. You perform like someone who already knows this material." "I'm doing my best, Sergeant." "Your best shouldn't be this good." "Not yet." Morrison stopped directly in front of her. "I'm going to find out what you're really about, one way or another." That evening, the 3 instructors met in Morrison's office. Maps and training schedules covered his desk, but their attention focused entirely on the Riley problem. "She's not normal," Brooks stated flatly. 3 weeks of training, and she hasn't struggled with a single exercise. "More than that," Hayes added. "She's better than our advanced trainees at some skills. That shooting today, those were expert marksman scores." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "So what are we dealing with? Prior military? Has to be. But why hide it? And why enroll in basic training if she already has the skills? Maybe she's some kind of inspector, testing our program." The possibility made all 3 instructors uncomfortable. If Riley was evaluating their training methods, their aggressive approach toward her could cause serious problems. Morrison made a decision. "Tomorrow we find out what she's really made of. No more gradual pressure. We're going to push her until something breaks." Hayes nodded grimly. "What did you have in mind?" "Something that will force her to show her real capabilities. And if she's hiding something, we'll expose it in front of everyone." Brooks smiled without humor. "About time. I'm tired of pretending this little charade is normal." Outside Morrison's office, Riley walked past on her way to evening equipment maintenance. Through the partially open window, fragments of conversation drifted out. She continued walking without changing pace, but her expression grew thoughtful. The instructors were planning something significant. After weeks of subtle pressure and increasing challenges, they were ready to escalate to direct confrontation. Riley had seen this pattern before in different contexts. She finished her equipment check and prepared for lights out, knowing tomorrow would likely bring the confrontation she had been avoiding. The instructors wanted to expose whatever they thought she was hiding. They had no idea what they were actually about to uncover. The next morning brought an unusual change to the training schedule. Instead of the standard physical conditioning, Morrison announced special combat assessment trials. Individual evaluations, he called them, though the predatory gleam in his eyes suggested something more personal. Riley noticed the setup immediately. The other recruits were divided into groups for different activities across the base, but she was assigned to remain with the 3 instructors at the main training facility. Isolated from witnesses except for a few advanced trainees who had been specifically asked to observe. Chun, you're up first for enhanced combat readiness testing, Morrison announced, consulting a clipboard that looked suspiciously new. We need to establish your actual skill level for proper placement in advanced training. Hayes gestured toward a large matted area that had been prepared with unusual care. Protective padding lined the walls, and the space was larger than necessary for standard training exercises. We set up a comprehensive evaluation. Multiple phases. Brooks stood near a table loaded with various training weapons and equipment. This will be more intensive than your regular sessions. Real-world scenarios, full contact assessments. The few advanced trainees positioned around the area exchanged glances. They had been told this was a standard evaluation, but the instructor's behavior seemed off. Too much preparation, too much focus on one recruit. Riley approached the matted area, her expression calm. What's the first assessment? Morrison smiled, but held no warmth. Hand-to-hand combat evaluation. We need to see how you perform against progressively challenging opponents. He gestured to one of the advanced trainees, a solid young man named Rodriguez who had been training for 6 months. Rodriguez here will start you off easy. Just basic technique demonstration. Riley nodded and moved to the center of the mat. Rodriguez joined her, looking slightly uncomfortable with the setup. He had been told to test her skills, but something about the instructor's intensity made him uneasy. Begin when ready, Morrison called out. Rodriguez approached cautiously, attempting a simple takedown that any trained recruit should be able to counter. Riley responded with textbook defensive technique, redirecting his momentum and maintaining control. Clean, efficient, exactly what the manual prescribed. Again, Morrison ordered. More aggressive this time. Rodriguez increased his intensity, but Riley matched him perfectly. Her movements remained controlled, almost casual in their precision. After several exchanges, Morrison called a halt. Interesting. Hayes, bring in Thompson. Thompson was larger than Rodriguez, with more advanced training and significantly more strength. The advanced trainees began to realize this wasn't a standard evaluation. The progression was too deliberate, the intensity escalating too quickly. Against Thompson, Riley's technique became more apparent. She didn't just counter his attacks, she controlled them. Her positioning was flawless, her timing precise. Thompson found himself consistently off balance, unable to establish any advantage despite his size and experience. Brooks leaned close to Morrison. She's not even breathing hard. I noticed. Let's see how she handles real pressure. Morrison stepped forward. Chun, that was adequate. Now we need to test your response to multiple opponents. Real combat situations rarely involve unknown encounters. Riley's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The advanced trainees saw it. Even if the instructors missed it, she was no longer in training mode. Thompson and Rodriguez together. Full contact assessment. Both advanced trainees hesitated. Two known scenarios were advanced training, typically reserved for much later in the program. This felt more like hazing than evaluation. Is that standard protocol? Rodriguez asked carefully. Morrison's voice hardened. Are you questioning the assessment structure, Rodriguez? No, Sergeant. Just clarifying parameters. Parameters are simple. Assess the recruit's capability under pressure. Begin. The two advanced trainees moved in from different angles, their reluctance obvious. Riley tracked both simultaneously, her stance relaxed but ready. When they committed to their attacks, her response was swift and decisive. Thompson found himself on the mat within seconds, Riley's counterattack flowing seamlessly into a defensive position against Rodriguez. Her movements were fluid, economical, demonstrating training far beyond basic military combat techniques. Rodriguez backed off, recognizing skill levels that exceeded his own. Sergeant, she's clearly qualified for advanced training. Morrison's frustration was becoming visible. One more assessment. Hayes, Brooks, you're up. The two corporals looked surprised. Both of us, Sergeant. Both of you. Full evaluation. This crossed a line that everyone present recognized. 3 unknown scenarios were not part of any standard training protocol. The advanced trainees stepped back, uncertain whether they should intervene or report what they were witnessing. Hayes and Brooks moved onto the mat, their body language suggesting they understood this had moved beyond official assessment. Riley remained in the center, perfectly balanced, watching all three instructors now. "This seems excessive," one of the watching trainees said quietly. Morrison spun toward the voice. "You have somewhere else you need to be." The trainee fell silent, but the tension in the room had shifted. Everyone present now understood they were witnessing something that was not official training. Riley spoke for the first time since the assessments began. "Are there specific parameters for this evaluation, or should I respond to whatever actions are taken?" Her question was calm, professional, but it carried an undertone that made the instructors pause. There was something in her voice, a quiet confidence that suggested she was no longer playing the role of confused recruit. Morrison stepped onto the mat himself. "Parameters are simple, Chun. Show us what you're really capable of." "All three of you, all three of us." Riley nodded once. "Understood." The advanced trainees had moved closer to the exits, sensing that whatever was about to happen had moved far beyond training exercises. The instructors formed a loose triangle around Riley, their intentions clear. For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, Riley allowed her true capabilities to surface. Her stance shifted from military basic to something more refined, more dangerous. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood combat. Morrison raised his hand to signal the beginning of what he thought would be Riley's final humiliation. He had no idea he was about to learn why some people should never be cornered. Morrison's hand dropped, and the three instructors moved simultaneously. Their plan was simple: overwhelm Riley through coordinated attack, force her into submission, and finally break the calm confidence that had frustrated them for weeks. They expected quick victory against someone they still saw as a small female recruit playing soldier. Hayes came in first from the left, attempting to grab Riley's arm and control her movement. Brooks moved from the right, reaching for her other side. Morrison approached Heaton, intending to use his size and authority to intimidate her into compliance. Riley's response was immediate and surgical. She stepped into Hayes' attack rather than away from it, using his momentum against him while simultaneously striking a pressure point that sent shooting pain up his arm. His grip loosened instantly. Brooks found himself grabbing empty air as Riley flowed away from his reach, her movements so smooth it seemed effortless. She was no longer where his muscle memory expected her to be. Morrison lunged forward, confident his size advantage would end this quickly. Riley met his advance with a technique that belonged in special operations training, not basic military education. Her counter redirected his forward momentum into a controlled fall that put him face down on the mat. The entire sequence took perhaps 3 seconds. The watching advanced trainees stepped back further, recognizing combat skills that exceeded anything they had seen before. Hayes shook his arm, trying to restore feeling to his fingers. What the hell was that? Riley had returned to a neutral stance in the center of the mat. Self-defense, corporal. Brooks circled wider now, his casual confidence replaced by wariness. That wasn't basic self-defense. It was adequate defense against the attack presented. Morrison pushed himself up from the mat, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Being taken down by the recruit he had planned to humiliate was not part of his scenario. "Again," he ordered. "All together this time. No holding back." The advanced trainees exchanged alarmed glances. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sergeant, maybe we should stay out of this," Morrison snapped. "This is an official evaluation." But everyone present knew this had moved far beyond any official protocol. The instructors were now operating on pride and anger rather than training doctrine. Hayes flexed his fingers, still feeling the effects of Riley's pressure point strike. "She's using techniques we haven't covered in training, which proves she's been hiding her real background," Brooks added. "Time to find out what that is." The three instructors spread out wider this time, approaching from different angles with more caution. They had underestimated her once and paid for it. Now they intended to use their numerical advantage more effectively. Riley tracked all three simultaneously, her posture relaxed but ready. She had spent weeks avoiding this confrontation, but now that it was happening, she felt the familiar calm that came with clarity of purpose. Morrison signaled with a sharp nod. This time their attack was coordinated and aggressive. Hayes dove low, trying to take out her legs. Brooks came in high, reaching for a chokehold. Morrison charged straight forward, using his weight to overwhelm her defensive position. Riley's response was a masterpiece of tactical efficiency. She used Hayes' low attack as leverage to elevate herself above Brooks' reaching arms, while simultaneously striking Morrison's solar plexus with enough force to stop his charge cold. Hayes found himself supporting Riley's weight for a split second before she used his position to launch into a spinning movement that caught Brooks across the temple with her elbow. The strike was precisely calculated, enough force to disorient without causing permanent damage. Morrison doubled over, gasping for air. Brooks staggered sideways, his vision blurred. Hayes collapsed under Riley's shifting weight, finding himself trapped in a position where any movement would cause significant joint pain. The entire exchange lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Riley landed lightly on her feet, perfectly balanced, while all three instructors were down in various states of distress. The training facility had gone completely silent. The advanced trainees stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. 3 experienced military instructors, working together, had been neutralized by a single recruit in less time than it took to describe. Thompson found his voice first. Holy hell! Rodriguez was already moving toward the exit. I need to report this to someone. Report what? Riley asked calmly. A training exercise that got out of hand? Morrison struggled to his feet, still fighting for breath. His face was red with exertion and humiliation. What are you? Riley helped Hayes to his feet with careful precision, ensuring his arm wasn't seriously injured. I'm a recruit in training, Sergeant. Brooks leaned against the wall, holding his head. Recruits don't fight like that. How should recruits fight? The question hung in the air without answer. Morrison looked around the room, taking in the shocked faces of the watching trainees, the obvious skill disparity that had just been demonstrated, the complete failure of his plan to intimidate Riley into submission. Hayes rotated his shoulder carefully. Where did you learn to do that? Various places. Various instructors. Morrison's frustration boiled over. Stop with the vague answers. You just took down 3 military instructors simultaneously. That's not recreational martial arts training. Riley remained calm. You asked for full evaluation of my capabilities. This is way beyond basic capabilities. Then perhaps the evaluation parameters were unclear. The logical response only made Morrison angrier. He had intended to embarrass Riley, to force her out of the program through intimidation and physical dominance. Instead, she had demonstrated skills that made him and his colleagues look incompetent. Thompson approached cautiously. Should we get medical attention for anyone? Riley shook her head. No serious injuries. Some bruising, temporary disorientation. Everyone will be fine within a few minutes. Her clinical assessment of the damage she had inflicted was perhaps more unsettling than the actual combat had been. She spoke like someone with extensive experience evaluating the effects of violence. Morrison straightened slowly, his breathing returning to normal. This isn't over, Chun. I hope not, Sergeant. I'm here to complete training. But as Riley walked toward the exit, everyone present understood that the dynamic had fundamentally changed. The small, quiet recruit who had endured weeks of harassment had just demonstrated that she could have ended it at any time. The question now was what else she might be capable of. Word of the training incident spread through Fort Braxton faster than Morrison could contain it. By evening chow, every recruit and half the base personnel had heard some version of what happened in the combat assessment facility. Most versions were wildly exaggerated, but the core facts remained consistent. 3 instructors had engaged 1 recruit and lost badly. Morrison sat in his office after hours, staring at a disciplinary report he wasn't sure how to file. Hayes and Brooks flanked his desk, their faces grim. All 3 bore visible reminders of their encounter with Riley, Morrison's careful movements suggested lingering soreness. Hayes favored his left arm, and Brooks occasionally touched his temple where a faint bruise was forming. Command is going to want answers, Hayes said quietly. Thompson and Rodriguez are talking. By tomorrow morning, this will reach the base commander. Morrison rubbed his forehead. What exactly are they going to say? That we conducted an inappropriate evaluation against regulations. They're going to say we got our asses handed to us by a recruit, Brooks stated bluntly. Which is exactly what happened. The admission hung heavy in the room. All three instructors had built their reputations on physical dominance and tactical superiority. Having that foundation shattered by someone they had dismissed as weak was professionally devastating. The question is what we do about Chun, Morrison continued. She's clearly not what she appears to be. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What if she's undercover? Military intelligence, inspector general, some kind of evaluation specialist? Then we just assaulted a superior officer, Brooks said grimly. That's court-martial territory. Morrison considered the possibility. Riley's vague answers about her background, her exceptional performance across all training categories, her combat skills that exceeded anything in basic military curriculum. The pieces suggested someone with extensive training far beyond civilian experience. Or she's exactly what she claims to be, Morrison said slowly. A recruit with unusual background who we pushed too far. Recruits don't fight like that, Hayes insisted. That was special operations level technique. Which means either she's special operations already, or she learned from someone who was. A knock at the office door interrupted their speculation. Morrison called for entry, expecting another instructor or perhaps a base administrator summoning them for explanation. Instead, Riley stepped through the doorway. She had changed from training gear into clean fatigues, her appearance regulation perfect. Her expression was calm, professional, showing no trace of the confrontation from earlier. Sergeant Morrison, you wanted to see me? Morrison hadn't requested any meeting, but her presence offered an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Chun. Yes, come in. Close the door. Riley complied, then stood at attention in front of his desk. The three instructors studied her carefully, looking for any sign of smugness or superiority after her demonstration. They found none. We need to discuss what happened today, Morrison began carefully. The training evaluation? That wasn't standard training, and you know it. Riley's expression didn't change. You requested full assessment of my capabilities. I responded to the situation as presented. Brooks leaned forward. The situation as presented was three instructors attacking one recruit. That's not training, that's assault. I was told it was enhanced combat readiness testing. I participated according to instructions. Her calm responses were more frustrating than arguments would have been. Morrison tried a different approach. Where did you learn to fight like that? Various training environments. Military training environments? Some military components, yes. Hayes jumped in. What's your real background, Chun? Because recruits don't have those skills. I'm a recruit in this training program. That's not an answer. Riley met his gaze directly. It's the accurate answer to your question. Morrison stood up, trying to reassert some authority in the situation. Look, we can do this easy or hard. Easy is you tell us who you really are and why you're here. Hard is we dig into your background until we find answers. I provided all relevant information during enrollment. Relevant according to who? According to enrollment requirements. The circular conversation was getting nowhere. Brooks tried a more direct approach. Are you military intelligence? No. Special operations? No. Law enforcement? No. Then where the hell did you learn combat techniques that just neutralized three military instructors? Riley was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. I had good teachers. What kind of teachers? Effective ones. Morrison slammed his hand on the desk. Enough games. You just demonstrated skills that could get people killed if misused. We need real answers. Riley's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. Sergeant, I'm here to complete training. What happened today occurred because you escalated a situation beyond normal parameters. I responded appropriately to protect myself. Appropriately? You could have seriously injured us. But I didn't. Every technique was precisely controlled to neutralize threat without permanent damage. If I had intended serious injury, the outcome would have been very different. The casual way she discussed potential violence was perhaps more unsettling than the actual demonstration had been. It suggested experience with situations where serious injury was a consideration. Hayes spoke quietly. "How many people have you hurt before?" Riley looked at him for a long moment. "Only when necessary." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you need." Morrison realized they weren't going to get detailed explanations through direct questioning. Riley had clearly been trained not just in combat, but in information security. Her responses revealed nothing while technically answering every question. "What happens now?" Brooks asked. "Now I continue training," Riley replied, "unless you have specific concerns about my performance." The three instructors exchanged glances. Their performance was the issue, not hers. They had initiated unauthorized physical confrontation and been decisively defeated. Any official complaint would require explaining their own actions. Morrison made a decision. "You're dismissed, Chun. Return to normal training schedule tomorrow." Riley nodded and turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Morrison called out, "Chun, one more thing." She turned back. "Don't discuss today's events with other recruits." "Understood, Sergeant." After she left, the three instructors sat in uncomfortable silence. They had learned nothing useful about Riley's background while confirming that she possessed skills they couldn't match. "So what now?" Hayes asked. Morrison stared at the closed door. "Now we figure out how to maintain authority over someone who just proved she doesn't need our protection or training." Outside his office, Riley walked through the darkening base toward the barracks. Other recruits she passed looked at her with new awareness. Word of the day's events having reached everyone. She had hoped to complete training without revealing her capabilities, but the instructors had forced the situation. Now, she would have to navigate the remainder of the program with everyone knowing she was more than she appeared. At least they still didn't know exactly what she was. 3 days passed in uneasy tension. Riley continued her training routine with mechanical precision while the instructors maintained careful distance, their authority undermined by the combat demonstration. Other recruits watched both sides warily, sensing the fragile balance that had replaced the normal training dynamic. Morrison spent those days making discreet inquiries about Riley's background. Military databases showed standard civilian enrollment with no red flags. Her listed references checked out as ordinary: a high school guidance counselor, a part-time employer, a family friend. Nothing suggested special operations training or intelligence connections. But Morrison's contacts and personnel had noticed something unusual. Riley's file had been flagged for privacy protection at a level typically reserved for sensitive assignments. Someone with significant authority wanted her background information restricted. On Thursday evening, Morrison made his decision. Official channels weren't providing answers, and Riley's continued presence was undermining his control over the training program. If standard approaches wouldn't work, he would create a situation that forced her to reveal whatever she was hiding. He called Hayes and Brooks to his office after evening formation. "Tomorrow night, after lights out, we're going to have a final conversation with Chun." Hayes looked uncomfortable. "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where she doesn't have an audience of recruits watching, where we can apply real pressure without witnesses filing reports." Brooks understood immediately. "You want to corner her privately. I want to find out what she's really doing here. And I want to make it clear that she's not running this training program." "What if she reacts the same way she did during the evaluation?" Morrison smiled grimly. "This time we'll be ready for her tricks. 3 of us, one of her. No rules about appropriate force." The plan was simple. Wait until the barracks were quiet, then approach Riley's bunk under pretense of disciplinary action. Take her to an isolated location where they could interrogate her without interruption. Use whatever pressure necessary to get real answers. Hayes had reservations. "If she really is some kind of undercover operative, this could destroy our careers." "Our careers are already in question," Morrison replied. "Base Command is asking questions about the training incident. We need leverage." And if she's just a civilian with unusual training, then she learns that civilians don't challenge military authority. Friday's training proceeded normally, but Riley noticed the change in instructor behavior. They were planning something. Their body language suggested coordination, secret communication, anticipation of action. She had seen similar patterns before in hostile environments. After evening chow, she approached Sarah Martinez privately. "I need a favor." Sarah looked around nervously. "What kind of favor?" "If anything unusual happens tonight, make sure someone reports it to base command." "What's going to happen?" "Probably nothing. But if it does, make sure there's an official record." "Riley, you're scaring me. Are the instructors planning something?" "Just be ready to make that call if needed." Riley returned to her bunk and prepared for lights out with extra care. She secured her personal items, arranged her gear for quick access, and positioned herself to have clear sight lines to all approaches. Other recruits noticed her unusual preparations, but didn't understand their significance. At 2,300 hours, the barracks went dark. Most recruits fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's training. Riley remained alert, listening to the sounds of the facility settling into night routine. At 0130 hours, she heard the soft footsteps approaching her corner of the barracks. 3 sets of feet moving with deliberate stealth. The instructors were making their move. Morrison's voice came as a harsh whisper. "Chun, get up." Quietly, Riley sat up in her bunk, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" "Move. Now, don't wake the others." She stood and followed them toward the exit, noting their formation. Hayes behind her, blocking retreat. Brooks to her left, controlling her movement. Morrison leading, choosing their destination. They walked through the quiet base toward the maintenance building, an isolated structure used for equipment storage. Perfect for a private conversation away from potential witnesses. Morrison unlocked the building and gestured for Riley to enter. The interior was dimly lit by security lighting, filled with training equipment and supply boxes. Multiple exit points, but all controlled by the instructor's positioning. "Now we're going to have that honest conversation," Morrison said, his voice no longer constrained by regulation or protocol. Riley remained calm. "What would you like to discuss?" "Everything you've been hiding since you got here." Hayes moved closer, his earlier reluctance replaced by determined aggression. "No more games. No more vague answers. Who are you really?" Brooks began circling to Riley's right, completing an encirclement pattern. "And don't tell us you're just a recruit. Recruits don't fight like you do." Riley assessed the situation quickly. 3 agitated instructors, isolated location, clear intent to use physical intimidation. They had learned nothing from their previous encounter and were about to escalate beyond anything that could be explained as official training. "I've told you everything relevant to my training status." Morrison stepped closer, his voice hardening. "That's not good enough anymore. You've disrupted this program, undermined our authority, and made us look incompetent. Time for payback. I completed all assigned training to standard. Your standards aren't military standards." Hayes moved within arm's reach. "Time to find out how tough you really are when we're not playing by training rules." Brooks completed the triangle formation. "No witnesses this time. No regulations. Just us finding out what you're made of." Riley recognized the moment of commitment. The instructors were no longer acting as military personnel conducting training. They were 3 angry men planning to use physical force against someone they perceived as a threat to their authority. Her voice remained steady. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Morrison's smile was cold. "We should have done this weeks ago." Riley nodded once, her expression shifting from compliance to something harder. "Then let's get it over with." The instructors moved simultaneously, confident their numerical advantage and private location would produce a different outcome than their previous encounter. They were about to discover that some people become more dangerous when cornered, not less. The 3 instructors lunged forward with coordinated aggression, their plans simple and brutal. Morrison grabbed for Riley's shoulders, intending to slam her against the wall. Hayes reached for her arms to control her movement. Brooks aimed low, planning to take out her legs and drop her to the concrete floor. For a brief moment, they believed they had her. Morrison's hands made contact with her shoulders. Hayes felt his fingers close around her wrist. Brooks thought his tackle would succeed. Then Riley moved. What happened next defied everything the instructors thought they knew about combat, physics, and human capability. Riley didn't resist their combined attack, she used it. Morrison's forward momentum became leverage as she dropped her center of gravity and redirected his force downward. Hayes found his grip on her wrist transformed into a painful joint lock that sent shooting agony up his arm. Brooks' low tackle met empty air as Riley elevated herself using Morrison's unbalanced position. The three instructors suddenly found themselves tangled together, their coordinated attack having become a collision of confused bodies. Riley flowed through their formation like water, striking pressure points with surgical precision as she passed. Morrison felt his legs give out as specific nerve clusters were compressed. Hayes' arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips. Brooks discovered that his sense of balance had abandoned him entirely, inner ear disrupted by a technique he didn't know existed. Within 5 seconds, all three instructors were on the ground in various states of distress and confusion. Riley stood in the center of the maintenance room, unmarked and barely breathing hard. Morrison tried to push himself up, but found his legs unresponsive. "What did you do to me?" "Temporary nerve disruption. Feeling will return in approximately 10 minutes. Hayes cradled his arm against his chest. "You could have broken my shoulder, but I didn't." The technique was precisely controlled for temporary incapacitation. Brooks sat on the floor, head in his hands, waiting for the room to stop spinning. How is this possible? Riley looked down at the three disabled instructors with something approaching pity. "You assumed physical size and numerical advantage would determine the outcome. That assumption was incorrect." Morrison's voice was strained with pain and humiliation. "Who taught you to fight like that?" People who understood that real combat isn't about strength or anger. It's about efficiency and control. What people? Military? Intelligence? Special operations? Riley was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. The instructors were no longer a threat, but they deserved some explanation for what had just happened to them. "I was trained by someone who believed I might need to protect myself in dangerous situations." He was very thorough in his instruction. "One person taught you all this. One person taught me the foundation. I developed the applications through practice and necessity." Hayes struggled to move his arm, testing the return of sensation. Practice against who? People who meant me harm. The simple statement carried implications that made all three instructors uncomfortable. Riley spoke like someone with extensive experience in real violence, not training scenarios. Brooks looked up from the floor. "How many people have you fought before?" "Enough to understand that most confrontations can be ended quickly if you know what you're doing." Morrison finally managed to prop himself against a supply crate. "Why didn't you do this the first day we harassed you?" "Because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I came here to complete training, not to fight instructors." "But you were ready to fight us if we pushed too far." Riley nodded. "I'm always ready to defend myself. That's survival." Hayes rotated his shoulder carefully, feeling returning to his arm. "You could have seriously hurt us. I could have killed you. All three of you, within the first 2 seconds of contact. The fact that you're sitting here having this conversation demonstrates considerable restraint on my part. The matter-of-fact way she discussed lethal capability was more disturbing than the actual demonstration had been. The instructors realized they had been completely at her mercy from the moment contact was made. Morrison studied Riley with new understanding. "You're not here for basic training. I'm here for the certification that completing this program provides." "Why do you need military certification?" "Personal reasons." Brooks managed to stand, using the wall for support. "If you can already do this, why go through months of basic training?" Riley considered the question. "Because sometimes the credential is more important than the capability. Sometimes you need official recognition of skills you already possess." "For what purpose?" "For opportunities that require documented military training." The instructors were beginning to understand that Riley's presence at Fort Braxton served a larger purpose they couldn't see. She wasn't hiding her abilities to deceive them. She was meeting requirements for something beyond their training program. Hayes tested his grip strength, fingers responding normally again. Are you planning to hurt anyone else here? Only if attacked. I have no interest in violence for its own sake. Morrison struggled to his feet, his legs slowly responding to commands. What happens now? Now you decide whether to file an incident report that requires explaining why 3 instructors cornered 1 recruit in an isolated building at 0130 hours and attempted to physically restrain her. The implication was clear. Any official complaint would require the instructors to admit they had abandoned all protocol and attempted what could only be described as assault. Brooks straightened slowly, his balance returning. And if we don't file a report, then I continue training, complete the program, and leave. This incident never happened. Morrison looked at his 2 colleagues, both of whom were nodding agreement. Their careers couldn't survive the investigation that would follow any official report of tonight's events. No report, he said quietly. Riley moved toward the maintenance building exit. Then I'll see you at morning formation. As she reached the door, Hayes called out, Chun, one question. She turned back. If you're this capable, why let us harass you for weeks? Riley was quiet for a moment. Because I hope you would eventually realize that targeting people based on appearance is both unprofessional and potentially dangerous. Did we realize that? You're about to. She left the 3 instructors sitting in the maintenance building, each contemplating how completely they had misjudged the quiet recruit who had endured their harassment with infinite patience until they finally pushed too far. Outside, Riley walked back toward the barracks through the quiet base, knowing that her time at Fort Braxton had fundamentally changed. The instructors would maintain distance now, but other challenges would emerge. At least she wouldn't have to pretend to be helpless anymore. The next morning brought an unusual atmosphere to Fort Braxton. Morrison, Hayes, and Brooks appeared for formation with careful movements and subdued demeanor. Other instructors noticed their colleagues' stiff postures and obvious discomfort, but received no explanations when they asked about injuries. Riley fell into formation with her usual precision, showing no signs of the previous night's encounter. To casual observation, nothing had changed, but experienced military personnel could sense the shift in power dynamics between the instructors and their formerly targeted recruit. Captain Williams, the base training commander, conducted his weekly inspection with particular attention to Morrison's group. Reports of unusual training incidents had reached his desk, and he wanted to assess the situation personally. Sergeant Morrison, how is recruit integration progressing? Morrison's response was carefully neutral. All recruits are meeting training standards, sir. Any particular challenges or concerns? No significant issues, Captain. Williams studied Morrison's face, noting tension that hadn't been present in previous weeks. I understand there was an enhanced combat assessment recently. Standard evaluation procedures, sir. All recruits performed adequately, including recruit Chun. Morrison hesitated for just a moment. Chun exceeded expectations. Riley maintained her position in formation, expression unchanged, but she was listening carefully to the exchange. The captain's questions suggested official interest in her performance. Williams approached Riley directly. Recruit Chun, how are you finding the training program? Challenging and educational, sir. Any concerns about instruction methods or facility procedures? Riley met his gaze directly. All instruction has been within appropriate parameters, Captain. The careful phrasing told Williams everything he needed to know. Chun was protecting the instructors from potential disciplinary action while making it clear she could provide different answers if pressed. Very good. Carry on. After Williams departed, training resumed with noticeable changes. Morrison assigned Riley standard duties without additional harassment. Hayes avoided direct interaction entirely. Brooks maintained professional distance that bordered on wariness. Other recruits noticed the transformation immediately. Sarah approached Riley during equipment maintenance. What happened? The instructors are acting completely different toward you. Riley cleaned her rifle with methodical precision. Nothing specific. Sometimes dynamics change. Change how? Morrison hasn't singled you out once today. Yesterday, he was looking for any excuse to give you extra duties. People adapt their behavior based on new information. What new information? Riley looked up from her weapon. That targeting people based on assumptions can produce unexpected results. Sarah wanted more details, but Riley's expression discouraged further questions. Around them, other recruits conducted their own whispered speculation about the sudden shift in instructor behavior. Thompson joined their conversation. Rodriguez thinks something happened after lights out last night. Says he heard movement in the barracks around 0130. What kind of movement? Sarah asked. People leaving. Quiet-like, but definitely multiple footsteps. Riley continued her maintenance routine without commenting. Thompson studied her face for any reaction. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Riley? I sleep pretty soundly. Uh-huh. And this morning the instructors are walking like they spent the night in a car wreck. Training can be physically demanding. Thompson wasn't buying the deflection. For the instructors? What kind of training were they doing at 0130? Sarah looked between Riley and Thompson, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Are you saying the instructors were hurt somehow? I'm saying they're moving like men who got their asses kicked. And the only person here capable of doing that is sitting right next to us. Riley set down her cleaning rod and faced Thompson directly. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that 3 instructors who have been harassing you for weeks suddenly can't walk straight. And you're the only person here with skills that could cause that. Other recruits had stopped their own conversations to listen. The speculation was becoming public, which created potential problems for everyone involved. Riley spoke quietly but clearly. Sometimes people learn that their assumptions about others are incorrect. When that happens, behavior changes. That's all that's occurred here. Did you fight them? I defended myself when necessary. The admission sent ripples through the listening recruits. Rodriguez moved closer. You took on all 3 instructors? I responded to a situation appropriately. Thompson leaned forward. How appropriately? No one was seriously injured. No one requires medical attention. The situation was resolved with minimal force. Sarah's eyes widened. You actually fought Morrison, Hayes, and Brooks? All 3 of them. The situation required defensive action. And you won. Riley was quiet for a moment. Define winning. You're sitting here unharmed while they can barely walk. Then yes, I suppose I won. The recruits exchanged amazed glances. Stories of instructor harassment were common throughout the base, but no one had ever heard of a recruit successfully fighting back against multiple instructors. Rodriguez spoke for the group. How did you do it? Training and preparation. What kind of training? The effective kind. Thompson shook his head. You're as bad as they were with the vague answers. Riley smiled slightly. Some questions don't need detailed answers. This one does. If you can take down 3 military instructors, we need to know what we're dealing with. You're dealing with someone who prefers to avoid violence, but is prepared to use it when necessary. Are you some kind of undercover operative? No. Special forces? No. Then what? Riley considered how much to reveal. The recruits deserved some explanation, but too much information could create additional complications. I'm someone who had good teachers and bad experiences. The combination produced useful skills. Sarah processed this carefully. Bad experiences with what? People who assumed I was helpless. The simple answer carried implications that made several recruits uncomfortable. Riley spoke like someone with experience in situations where violence was common, not exceptional. Rodriguez asked the question they were all thinking. How many people have you had to fight before? Riley returned to cleaning her rifle. Enough to get good at it. Around them, the normal sounds of training continued, but the recruits' understanding of their quiet colleague had fundamentally changed. The small woman who had endured weeks of harassment without complaint had revealed capabilities that exceeded those of their instructors. The question now was what else she might be capable of, and why someone with her skills needed basic military certification. Word of Riley's confrontation with the instructors spread through Fort Braxton like wildfire. By afternoon, recruits from other training companies were finding excuses to observe her during exercises. The story had grown into telling. Some versions claimed she had hospitalized all three instructors. Others suggested she was a secret government assassin. Captain Williams decided the situation required immediate clarification. He couldn't have wild rumors undermining the base's training authority, but he also couldn't ignore reports that three instructors had been decisively defeated by a single recruit. During evening formation, Williams made an unexpected announcement. Tomorrow morning, we will conduct comprehensive combat proficiency demonstrations. All recruits will participate. All instructors will observe and evaluate. Morrison exchanged uneasy glances with Hayes and Brooks. A public demonstration would put Riley's capabilities on full display in front of the entire base leadership. Williams continued, "These demonstrations will establish actual skill levels for all personnel and ensure appropriate training placement going forward." Riley understood immediately. The captain was creating an official venue for her to display whatever abilities she possessed, eliminating speculation while providing documented assessment of her capabilities. That evening, recruits gathered in small groups throughout the barracks, discussing what tomorrow might reveal. Sarah approached Riley's bunk with obvious concern. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" Riley folded her clothing with military precision. "Should I be? Everyone's going to be watching. If you really did what people are saying, tomorrow will prove it to the entire base. And if I didn't, then the rumors will die and things go back to normal." Riley considered this. "Would you prefer things go back to normal?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I prefer to understand what's actually happening here. Tomorrow you'll have that understanding." The next morning brought unusual energy to Fort Braxton. Word of the combat demonstrations had reached all corners of the base. Officers who normally avoided training exercises found reasons to observe. Even base command personnel were expected to attend. The demonstration area had been expanded to accommodate larger audiences. Multiple training mats were arranged with clear sight lines for observers. Video recording equipment had been positioned at strategic angles clearly. This event would be documented for official review. Riley arrived in standard training gear, her appearance regulation perfect and unremarkable. Watching personnel expected someone obviously dangerous, not the small, quiet recruit who moved through preparation routines with calm efficiency. Captain Williams addressed the assembled crowd. "Today's demonstrations will assess combat readiness across all skill levels. Participants will engage in progressive challenges designed to reveal actual capabilities." He gestured toward the instructors. "Evaluation will be conducted by qualified personnel using standardized criteria." Morrison stepped forward reluctantly. The public nature of this demonstration meant he couldn't apply the personal animosity that had driven previous encounters with Riley. First assessment, basic hand-to-hand combat technique. "Recruit Chun, you're up first." Riley moved to the center mat as murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Some observers had heard the rumors and expected immediate spectacle. Others saw only a small female recruit facing what appeared to be routine evaluation. "Your opponent will be Instructor Martinez from Company B," Morrison announced. Martinez was a solid, experienced combat instructor with no personal involvement in the previous conflicts. His reputation for fair but challenging assessments made him an appropriate choice for this public demonstration. Riley faced Martinez across the mat, her posture relaxed but alert. The watching crowd fell silent, sensing that whatever was about to happen would resolve the speculation that had gripped the base. Martinez approached with professional caution. He had heard the rumors, but remained skeptical that any recruit could possess the capabilities being claimed. "Standard defensive techniques," he called out. "Begin when ready." Martinez initiated a controlled attack designed to test basic defensive responses. Riley met his advance with textbook military technique, clean and efficient but unremarkable. "Good. Increase intensity." Martinez escalated his attack speed and complexity. Riley's responses remained precise, exactly what training manuals prescribe for each situation. Watching personnel began to relax. This looked like normal recruit evaluation, not the legendary combat skills that rumors had suggested. Then Martinez decided to test her limits. He launched a combination attack that would challenge even advanced trainees, expecting to overwhelm her defensive capabilities. Riley's response was instantaneous and devastating. She flowed through Martinez's attack like it was choreographed, redirecting his momentum while striking pressure points with surgical precision. Within 3 seconds, Martinez was face down on the mat, completely immobilized. The watching crowd erupted in surprised voices. This was not standard recruit performance. Martinez tried to push himself up, but found his arms unresponsive. "What did you do?" Riley helped him to his feet with careful precision. "Pressure point techniques for temporary immobilization. Feeling will return in approximately 5 minutes." Captain Williams stepped forward. "Demonstrate that sequence again." "Against who, sir?" Williams looked around the assembled instructors. "Volunteers." No one moved. Every instructor present had just watched Martinez, an experienced combat specialist, neutralized in seconds by techniques they didn't recognize. "I'll go." The voice came from Master Sergeant Davis, the base's senior combat instructor and a former special operations veteran. If anyone could properly assess Riley's capabilities, it would be Davis. Davis approached the mat with the confident bearing of someone who had survived real combat in multiple theaters. He studied Riley carefully, noting her stance, balance, and the subtle indicators that marked truly dangerous opponents. "Full contact assessment," Davis announced. "No restrictions." Riley nodded. "Understood, Master Sergeant." Davis attacked without warning, using techniques learned in actual combat zones. His assault was fast, brutal, and designed to overwhelm through shock and aggression. Riley's counterattack was a masterpiece of tactical efficiency. She used Davis's momentum against him while executing a combination of strikes that targeted multiple pressure points simultaneously. Davis found himself airborne for a brief moment before hitting the mat with controlled force. The entire sequence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Davis lay motionless, not unconscious, but completely unable to move. The watching crowd had gone absolutely silent. Master Sergeant Davis was a legend on the base, someone recruits heard about, but never expected to see defeated by anyone, much less a basic training recruit. Riley knelt beside Davis, checking his condition with clinical precision. Temporary paralysis affecting voluntary muscle control. Duration approximately 10 minutes. No permanent damage. Davis tried to speak, but could only manage a whisper. "Where did you learn that?" "Someone who thought I might need it someday." Captain Williams approached the mat slowly. "Who taught you those techniques, Recruit Shun?" Riley looked up at him from beside the paralyzed Master Sergeant. "My father, sir." "What was your father's background?" "Special Activities Division." He believed in thorough preparation. The admission sent ripples through the watching officers. Special Activities Division was the CIA's most classified operational unit, specializing in scenarios where conventional military action wasn't appropriate. Williams nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "And why are you here, Recruit Shun?" "Because some opportunities require official military credentials, regardless of existing capabilities." "What opportunities?" Riley helped Davis into a sitting position as feeling began returning to his extremities. "The kind my father prepared me for, sir." The demonstration was over, but its implications were just beginning to unfold. The silence that followed Riley's revelation stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Master Sergeant Davis sat on the mat, slowly regaining control of his limbs while staring at the recruit who had just neutralized him with techniques he had never encountered in decades of military service. Captain Williams was the first to find his voice. "Special Activities Division." It wasn't a question. Everyone present with sufficient security clearance understood the implications. SAD operatives were legends within military circles, ghosts who operated in situations too sensitive for conventional forces. Colonel Henderson, the base commander, pushed through the crowd of observers. He had been watching from the back, initially dismissive of what appeared to be routine training demonstrations. Now his expression was grim with understanding. "Chun, front and center." Riley moved to attention before the colonel, her bearing perfect despite having just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of veteran special operations personnel. Your father's name? Henderson said quietly. James Chun, sir. Retired Special Activities Division. Henderson's face went pale. Shadow 7. Riley nodded once. Yes, sir. Murmurs rippled through the watching officers. Shadow 7 was a call sign known only in the highest levels of military intelligence, a SAD operative credited with missions that officially never happened. Morrison stepped forward, his voice strained. Sir, we had no indication of any special background during her enrollment. Henderson turned on Morrison with barely contained fury. You had no indication because her file is classified at levels you don't have access to. How exactly have you been treating this recruit? The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Morrison, Hayes, and Brooks exchanged panicked glances, realizing their weeks of harassment had been directed at the daughter of one of the military's most elite operatives. Davis struggled to his feet, still unsteady but determined to speak. Colonel, this recruit just demonstrated combat techniques I've never seen. If she learned those from Shadow 7, her capabilities exceed anything we can teach here. Henderson nodded grimly, which raises the question of why she's here at all. All eyes turned to Riley, who maintained perfect military bearing despite being the center of intense scrutiny from the base's senior leadership. Sir, certain opportunities require documented military training regardless of existing skill levels. I need official certification to access those opportunities. What opportunities specifically? Riley hesitated for the first time since the demonstration began. I'm not authorized to discuss details without appropriate clearances, sir. Henderson understood immediately. Riley was being recruited for operations that required both her inherited capabilities and official military credentials, the kind of assignments her father once handled. Thompson, watching from the crowd of recruits, finally understood why Riley had endured weeks of harassment without retaliation. She wasn't hiding her abilities out of deception. She was following operational protocols that required maintaining cover until absolutely necessary. Sarah stepped closer to Rodriguez. Did you understand any of that? Enough to know we've been training alongside someone who could probably kill everyone here if she wanted to. Martinez, the first instructor Riley had neutralized, was testing his restored mobility. How long have you been able to do this? Riley turned toward him. My father began training me when I was 7. He believed the world was dangerous for people like us. People like you? People who might be targeted because of their family connections or operational knowledge. The simple explanation carried implications that made several officers uncomfortable. Riley had been raised not as a normal child, but as a potential operative who might need to survive in hostile environments. Hayes found his voice. When we cornered you in a maintenance building, you could have killed us. Riley met his gaze directly. Yes. Why didn't you? Because killing should only occur when absolutely necessary for survival. You were annoying, not lethal. The casual way she discussed deadly force was perhaps more unsettling than her actual demonstration had been. She spoke like someone for whom violence was a tool to be used precisely, not an emotional response. Colonel Henderson made a decision. Chun, you're hereby transferred to advanced individual training. Standard basic training is clearly inappropriate for your skill level. Riley remained at attention. Sir, I need to complete the full basic training program for certification purposes. Whose certification requirements? I'm not authorized to specify, sir. Henderson's expression showed he understood the answer without hearing it spoken. Riley was being prepared for assignments that required specific documentation, regardless of her actual capabilities. Brooks stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, if I may ask, how many people know about her background? Very few, and it will remain that way. Henderson's voice carried unmistakable warning. What happened here today is classified information. Anyone discussing Chen's background or capabilities outside official channels will face court-martial. The threat was clear. Riley's demonstration had revealed information that could compromise operational security if it became public knowledge. Davis approached Riley with obvious respect. Your father taught you well. He taught me what he thought I'd need to survive. Do you think you'll need those skills? Riley considered the question carefully. My father believed preparation was better than regret. Recent events suggest he was correct. Morrison finally found the courage to speak. Chun, about the past few weeks. Riley turned toward him with an expression that was professionally neutral, but somehow more threatening than anger would have been. Sergeant Morrison, you treated me exactly as you would treat any recruit you perceived as weak. The fact that your perception was incorrect doesn't change your actions. Are you going to file a complaint? No, but I suggest you consider whether your assessment methods are as reliable as you believed. The quiet rebuke was more devastating than any formal complaint would have been. Morrison realized he had spent weeks harassing someone who could have ended his career or his life at any moment. Henderson addressed the entire group. Training will resume, normal schedule tomorrow. Chin will complete the standard program as requested. All personnel will treat her exactly as they would any other recruit. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled instructors, with the understanding that she is not, in fact, any other recruit. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah approached Riley cautiously. So what happens now? Riley adjusted her gear with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout training. Now I finish what I came here to do. And then, Riley looked toward the horizon where storm clouds were gathering. Then I do what my father trained me for. Around them, Fort Braxton was returning to normal routine, but everyone present understood that normal had been permanently redefined by 15 seconds of combat that revealed capabilities most of them would never possess. The quiet recruit they had underestimated was preparing for a future none of them could imagine. 6 weeks later, Riley stood in formation for a final day at Fort Braxton. The base that had once viewed her as an easy target now treated her with respectful distance. Word of her capabilities had spread through unofficial channels, creating a reputation that preceded her into every training exercise. The graduation ceremony proceeded with military precision, but everyone present understood this was unlike any basic training completion they had witnessed. Riley received her certification with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the program, showing no sign of the extraordinary events that had marked her time there. Captain Williams approached her after the ceremony. Your orders came through this morning. Riley accepted the sealed envelope without surprise. Assignment location? Classified. But I suspect you already know. She did. The recruitment process that had brought her to Fort Braxton was part of a larger plan her father had set in motion years earlier. His connections within Special Activities Division had arranged opportunities that required both her inherited skills and official military credentials. Morrison stood nearby, having requested permission to speak with Riley before her departure. His relationship with her had evolved from antagonistic harassment to wary respect, tinged with embarrassment over his initial misjudgments. Chun, I owe you an apology. Riley turned toward him with professional courtesy. For what, Sergeant? For treating you like you were weak. For pushing you when I should have recognized what you were capable of. You treated me based on available information. That's reasonable decision-making. Morrison shook his head. I treated you based on assumptions and prejudice. There's a difference. Riley considered this carefully. What will you do differently with future recruits? Ask questions before making judgments. Look for capability instead of weakness. That sounds like improvement. Hayes and Brooks joined the conversation, both men carrying themselves differently around Riley than they had during her first weeks. The physical confrontation in the maintenance building had taught them lessons that extended beyond personal combat. Are you really going into special operations? Hayes asked. I'm going where my skills can be most useful. Brooks looked concerned. Will you be safe? Riley smiled slightly at the question. Safety was never the objective. Effectiveness was. Sarah approached with obvious emotion, having formed the closest friendship with Riley among the recruits. Their relationship had deepened after the public demonstration revealed Riley's true background. I'm going to miss having you around. It felt safer knowing you were there. Riley embraced her briefly. You're stronger than you think. You don't need protection from me or anyone else. What if something happens and we need help? Then you'll handle it. That's what the training was for. Thompson joined the group, his curiosity about Riley having evolved into genuine respect. Where do you think you'll end up? Wherever the mission requires. What kind of missions? Riley looked toward the horizon where transport vehicles were arriving to collect departing graduates. The kind that don't make it into official reports. Master Sergeant Davis approached with measured steps, his respect for Riley evident in his bearing. Their brief combat encounter had convinced him that her capabilities exceeded his own hard-earned expertise. Your father would be proud. Riley's expression softened slightly. You prepare me for this. Whether he be proud depends on how I use what he taught me. Any advice for those of us who will keep training recruits? Remember that people aren't always what they appear to be. Sometimes the quiet ones are quiet for good reasons. Colonel Henderson appeared for Riley's final checkout, his manner formal but respectful. Her presence at Fort Braxton had created complications he was still working to resolve, but he understood the larger purposes her training served. Your performance here has been noted at the highest levels. Are you ready for what comes next? Riley shouldered her duffel bag with the same efficient movement she had used on arrival. I've been ready since I was 7 years old. Your father's training? His gift to me. The ability to survive in a dangerous world. Henderson nodded. Good luck, Chun. Make it count. Riley walked toward the transport vehicle that would take her to her first classified assignment. Behind her, Fort Braxton continued its mission of transforming civilians into soldiers, but her departure marked the end of an unusual chapter in the base's history. As the vehicle pulled away, Sarah watched from the barracks window. Do you think we'll ever see her again? Thompson considered the question. Probably not. People like that don't usually come back to places like this. People like what? People who are already living the lives the rest of us are training for. What did you think of Riley's response to the instructor's intimidation? Was her restraint and final demonstration of capabilities justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Months later, reports began filtering through intelligence channels about successful operations in hostile territories. Missions accomplished with precision that suggested exceptional individual capability. The reports never mentioned names or specific personnel, but those who knew about Riley's background recognized the signature efficiency that marked her father's legacy. At Fort Braxton, new recruits arrived each week for basic training. Instructors who had witnessed Riley's demonstration approached their duties with greater awareness that appearances could be deceiving. Some recruits were exactly what they seemed civilians learning military skills for the first time. Others might be carrying capabilities that exceeded their instructor's experience. The lesson Riley had taught extended beyond combat techniques. In a world where assumptions could be dangerous, careful observation and respectful treatment had become survival skills for trainers as much as trainees. Her quiet presence had left an impact that would influence training approaches for years to come. A reminder that underestimating people based on appearance wasn't just unprofessional, it could be lethal. Riley Chun had completed her mission at Fort Braxton, but her real work was just beginning in places where her father's training would determine not just success, but survival.